The revolution was the first time in their marriage that they were apart for an extended period. In the fall of 1775, Washington traveled to Massachusetts to meet with her husband. On the journey north, she experienced her newfound celebrity status for the first time as the wife of a famed general. She joined him in Cambridge, from where he and the other Continental Army officers were operating. While staying in Cambridge, she served as a hostess for guests of the officers. She would also sew clothes for the soldiers while at camp, encouraging other officers' wives to do the same, leading to the creation of a sewing circle that contributed to the war effort. Though she hid it from those around her, Washington was frightened by the gunfire that could be heard from the nearby siege of Boston. She accompanied her husband when operations were relocated to New York, but she was sent to Philadelphia as British forces came closer. The American Revolution became increasingly stressful for her after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, as the risks he faced on the battlefield increased. Each winter, Washington would join her husband at his encampment while fighting was stalled, improving morale for the soldiers and for her husband personally. The quality of her housing varied during these visits, both in comfort and in safety. General Lafayette observed that she loved her husband madly. Washington was kept informed of the war's developments by her husband, sometimes performing clerical work for him, and she was even permitted to know military secrets. Each spring, when conflict resumed, she returned to Mount Vernon. She became a symbol of the war effort alongside her husband as a grandmotherly figure that cared for the soldiers. The Continental Army settled in Valley Forge, the third of the 8 winter encampments of the Revolution, on December 19, 1777. Washington traveled 10 days and hundreds of miles to join her husband in Pennsylvania. On April 6, Elizabeth Drinker and 3 friends arrived at Valley Forge to plead with the general to release their husbands from jail. The men, all Quakers, had refused to swear a loyalty oath to the American revolutionaries. Because the commander was not available at first, the women visited with Martha. Drinker described her later in her diary as a sociable, pretty kind of woman. The Washington's son John was serving as a civilian aide to his father during the siege of Yorktown in 1781 when he died of camp fever, a contemporary diagnosis for epidemic typhus. After his death, the Washingtons adopted the youngest 2 of his 4 children, Eleanor, Nellie, Parke Custis, and George Washington Parke, Washie, Custis. The Washingtons also provided personal and financial support to the children of many of their relatives and friends. The Washingtons returned to Mount Vernon in 1783. They stayed at Mount Vernon for much of the Confederation period, living in retirement with their nephew, nieces, and grandchildren. Washington, now in poorer health, believed that her husband was finished with public service. She spent her time raising their grandchildren, constantly worried for their health after having all 4 of her children and many other relatives die of illness. She also resumed hosting company at Mount Vernon, recruiting several of her nieces and other young women to assist her, as the house was overwhelmed with visitors. Their life at Mount Vernon was interrupted again when he was asked to participate at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and again when he was chosen as the first President of the United States in 1789. After the war, Washington was not fully supportive of her husband's agreeing to be President of the newly formed United States. She did not immediately join him at the Capitol in New York City, only arriving in May 1789. The journey was followed by the press, which was unprecedented in the attention that it paid to a woman's actions, and the entourage was met with admirers and fanfare in each town that it passed through. It was during this journey that she gave her only public speech as First Lady, thanking those that came to see her. She arrived on the presidential barge, escorted by her husband, immediately establishing the president's wife as a public figure. After arriving at the Capitol, Washington became the inaugural First Lady of the United States, though the term would not be used until later. Instead, she was referred to as Lady Washington.